Okay. Welcome to the Candid Cox Cast today, where we talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly parts of coxing and rowing. If you have been cropped out of pictures, hit a log, steered terribly, don't think you're special because you're certainly not alone. Obviously, right now, a lot of us are off the water, but that doesn't mean we're going to stop bringing you some good content. So today I am super excited to bring one of my favorite people in the world ever, rowing and not rowing, to the podcast because I think he really has a lot to offer. So this is Dan Beery, and we like to read Wikipedia pages here because they're kind of funny, and sometimes they're accurate and sometimes they're not. So to give you a little intro, Dan Beery is an American competition rower, Olympic champion, world champion, and World Cup gold medalist. Beery won the gold medal in the men's 8 at the 2004 Summer Olympics as a member of the American team. The time, 5:19.85, was a new world record. Apparently, he retired from rowing in 2008, but tell me, according to Wikipedia, how accurate is that? Tell me a little bit about who you are.
Okay. Well, I was born in Indiana. Right. I went to Bryan College for 2 years to play college basketball. I transferred to Tennessee Chattanooga. Coach Espeseth, the rowing coach there, saw me playing pickup basketball. And my original plan was to walk on because they had an amazing team with Johnny Taylor. He later went to the NBA. And I was going to walk on and just, sit the bench. But he asked me to try rowing. And here we are. So, and for a living, I work for AG Administrators. And we do sports insurance and national governing bodies, collegiate athletics. So that's what I do for my day job now. And thank you for your kind words. It's been wonderful being friends with you over the years, and just watching your success and your interest in all the various capacities that you give back to the sport. So thanks for having me.
Oh, it's absolutely my pleasure. Honestly, it's a true honor, and I think. I'm trying to remember exactly how it happened, but I think we met at Penn AC in Philly.
Yep.
A while ago. It's been so long now. It's a little terrifying. And I do remember the first time. This is where we kind of start talking about how we can really help coxswains here, because I think you are one of those people. Like, one of the reasons I wanted to have you on was that you. First of all, everything you say sounds like it should be a t-shirt, a bumper sticker, like the most epic advice ever. You have such good advice for rowers and coxswains. And I will never forget the first time that you actually raced for me. And I was like, you won the gold. Like, it was kind of a big deal having you in the boat. Like, like, what do you do? How do you please someone who's like been to the top, And so I remember asking you, like, what is it that you want to hear or that you don't want to hear? Like, what drives you crazy? Help me help you. And you literally were just like quiet for a little bit. And then we're like, Whitney, you just tell me when to go, and I will have the power to change the outcome of this race.
Oof,
and I was
confidence.
terrified. I was like, okay, all right. I'm excited and simultaneously terrified. But the beauty of that was that it was so simple, and I think a lot of coxswains forget that too, that it's really like when you get to that level, there's almost a simplicity in it that, like, I think coxswain guys like you is almost easier than like novices, truly. So I don't know. How do you see the different levels in that sort of, like, as you move up the ranks in rowing, does it seem like coxswains almost have a little bit less to do? Or, like, what do you think about that?
Well, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It definitely changes through the years, right? And a great high school coxswain is going to be a little different than a great college coxswain. And a great elite coxswain is going to be different, again, I think, in many capacities, because there's going to be a little bit less for them to do in some sense, like I'll give you an example. Like there might be less to do as far as boat management, but more to do off the water, right? So the first time I met Pete Chipolone, I was cooling down off after getting off of a race, a head race, and I came inside and I had to go back out again. So I was sitting on the erg and I said, I don't even know if I should cool down. I'm getting ready to go back out in 45 minutes. And it was the first time I'd ever seen or interact with Pete. And as he was walking by, he just stopped and he said, "Of course you should cool down." And then he walked off. And I think that it becomes at the elite level, it becomes you're sort of fine tuning and polishing, making sure your guys are cooling down. You're looking for those, smaller details that you can use to help your crew, and really sort of being a student of that, of those finer details, right? And I think a great college coxswain, you'd probably agree with this, is sort of a really good social organizer, right? Maybe keeping his guys and girls out of trouble, And I think there's less of that, although there definitely is some of that at the elite level. Yeah, I think it changes through time, and there should be less sort of scary or unforeseen things happening with your crew on the water. And yeah, I guess that's what I should say about that.
I actually get a lot of questions about that. Like, how do I go elite? And that's first of all, the opportunities for coxswains are just so slim. There's just there's one seat basically. Unless two, if you're counting, men and women, 2 seats essentially now. And, you were so lucky to get to race in so many Cox pairs, 8s, 4s. Like, you've been in so many types of Cox boats that there were more opportunities. So with these coxswains trying to sort of move up the ranks, Cox better teams, whether it's men or women, it seems like it's just getting harder and harder. And so we get a lot of questions about, like, what makes us stand out? Like, what's a guy like you going to look at in a Cox and say, I want her in the boat, I want him in the boat at your level? It's going to be those details, not just the social organizing, but like you said, the fine tuning. So can you elaborate a little bit more on kind of what those things are? Like on the micro level, like, it sounds easy, but on a micro level, specifically, what is a coxswain going around doing day to day where you're like, they're on it, they're good?
Gotcha. Okay, I'll try to give a few examples of 4 guys that I've raced with that I thought were just really, really amazing, and I'm gonna have to leave a few out. But Joey Mannion, Marcus McElhenney, Ned Delgercio, and of course Pete Chipolone. So starting with Pete, when he would have us do drills, obviously it's a tense environment, and you want to get it right, not only for your own benefit, but for the team. And not for nothing, Mike is also there, so you're really trying to focus very hard and get things correct, in a situation where you're tired, you're fatigued, right? And Pete would have this really neat sort of sensibility. He would say, like, Beery, do this, or Beery, do that, or he would say something to someone in the crew, and if it was me that messed up, I would just say, "Sorry, Pete," and he would just say, "No worries, dude," and leave it alone and move on. Yeah, he's the best. So there's this sort of like magical thing where you're commanding their attention. If you mess up, or if they lose focus, or the fatigue just gets to you, then he understands that, right? And it's not a situation where you're going to linger on it. You need to move past it in the moment, and then maybe think about it after practice again. So he had a really great sensibility about in that sense. Ned Delgercio also had a great presence about him and awareness. just an awareness of what's going on, and sort of just socially keeping things light and fun, which helps a lot. Marcus McElhenney was, I feel like, a lot more just dialed in, and he was really structured about how the workout was going to be executed. He had a really good sense of what Mike wanted for that workout and how to get there and how to make that happen. And and Joey Mannion was my favorite guy from the standpoint of just being like someone you want to listen to. Someone that you just sort of like being around him, and you love, you just love his attitude, right? So each of them had this sort of different component, but physically, I always wanted someone that could really literally hold themselves stiff, like absolutely rigid in the boat while steering, which is the most impossible thing to do. If you look at a video of Pete Cipollone, he is just holding himself ramrod stiff in the boat. And that's really helpful because, as 38 strokes a minute, there's a lot of momentum moving around. And if the coxswain is sort of, if their body is literally jolting around in the boat, that's not good, because you can definitely feel that, right? So those are some of the things that I think about. Obviously, I think if you ask Pete, he'll be honest with you that an elite eight can just jump one way or the other. And while you're holding yourself still and calling the race, it's a lot to do to steer the boat, right? And to know how and when to sort of let it go versus, getting on the tiller, and how that works and how it can affect the boat. And we would be in practices with Pete where I actually felt like he could steer around a corner and not affect our balance. There was just some way that he had of moving the rudder, and the feel that he had, the dexterity that he had, that wouldn't disrupt our rowing. And as far as, sort of feeling that was amazing, because he was really, really good at how he could feel what was going on in the boat and diagnose it by feeling. And so all those four guys could diagnose to varying degrees what's going on with the boat, how much check is occurring, what is slightly faster versus what is slightly slower. And that's not an easy thing to do, right? It takes a lot of practice and years to build up those skills and that awareness and dexterity. And then I think the last thing, I want to throw it back to you, but the last thing I look for is someone like Pete had a great sensibility about what we had left, right? Like, not calling the sprint too early, right? And when you call it, having the confidence to go, and really empty the tank. And if you have that trust in your coxswain, then it's hugely beneficial to your crew, because you obviously don't want them to, you don't want them to redline too early. But Pete had a great sensibility, even in head races, when we don't really have a good marker for where we're at, head of the Charles. Pete called one of our races at the head of the Charles, and I thought for sure that he was calling us up way too early. But we made it to the line, and we were in a Cox 4, and we made it across the line, and I was just stunned, because I probably after everything he and I had been through, I should have had more confidence. But for a second or two, I thought he had called it too early. He called our sprint too early. But he was so dialed in all the time, and having that confidence in him, just because of his professionalism. Those are all the things that I was looking for. And you definitely have those. And man, if we're talking about getting to the U.S. team, the competition to get there is brutal. So I definitely feel for you in that capacity.
Yeah, it's true. And I mean, Pete is obviously known as just being a master at some of these things. He's so good at all of those things that you mentioned. Now, do you think a lot of that comes with knowing your guys that well. Like, sure, there are certain things you can feel when you get in a boat. Maybe it's a newer crew and you can tell that there are some things going on, but you don't always know, like, is this normal for this crew? Like, is this crew just kind of having an off day? Or when you're trying to diagnose the issue, is it just knowing your guys? Like, if Pete knows exactly when to call you guys up, you may or may not know that with a brand new crew or a newer crew. And we have a lot of coxswains here that write in that are either a little bit newer, or they switch boats around a decent amount when they're, at university. So you're kind of constantly with newer guys. Like, you're not necessarily spending an entire season practicing racing on the water side by side every day with the same guys. So do you think that that's something that's learned over time when you know your rowers that well, or is that something that can be taught to feel just in general, but it just takes time?
Oh, great question. Okay, so, well, I would say at the elite level, because of the way the racing formats that it can take, so Pete's actually going to see us in pairs, outside of the boat. So he's going to get, a lot of sort of, a lot of data on how we race and use that, right? So for him, for Ned, for Marcus and the other guys, they're going to get a lot of data that we may not even be aware that they sort of have mentally about how we can race.
We pay attention.
That's right. So that's right. So that's really helpful, right? And that informs their decision. And I think that also just being able to looking at your guys, but if you're in a bow loader, that was the other thing about the race with Pete, is that we were in a bow loader, and so I'm like, how does he kind of know? But having that sixth sense isn't something that you can really teach. I do think there's a psychological component of getting your guys ramped up, your guys or your gals, your ladies ramped up. That's important. But managing that, right? Managing that excitement and how you sort of how that manifests itself throughout the race is really important. And so I think new coxswains can try to manage the the excitement and the raceability of their crew, and perhaps that would not take as much time to learn that, right? And I think Pete was the kind of guy that it was just kind of like slowly opening a valve, right? As opposed to getting your crew all fired up, calling a 10 in the first 500 meters, and just sort of screaming at them the whole time, right? It's not helpful. But just sort of this drum beat of intensity that's building, and just slowly releasing more and more of that energy, and just sort of building the excitement and building a crescendo into the last 500 or 650, wherever you're going to really start to reach for the line, right? And I think that parts of that can be learned by a new coxswain, just really trying to manage your guys, and then manage themselves, their own excitement level, and how they're approaching the race.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I mean, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but I try to tell new coxswains too, or other masters coxswains even, that are trying to kind of come back into it and learn and practice and get better at racing, that coxswains are almost storytellers. Like, you're paying attention to everything that's going on, but you're also sort of like walking your guys, through this race, buoy by buoy and stroke by stroke, and kind of just telling them, like, now here's what's going on. Here's where you are. And I kind of cycle through just basically 3 bits of information, keep it really simple, like, where are you? What do you need to do next? And, real basic. And
yeah,
so,
yeah,
like, tell a story, tell a story, but it's like, it's easier said than done.
Yeah. Yes. Well, each of those 4 guys that were so amazing, they would, Pete would have like some, just some like sound effects, or Ned would just sort of say things like chopping wood, just sort of different little things that he would say. And as we're going down the race course, talking about the other crews. But you're right, that's a really cool way to think about it, just sort of telling a story. And that doesn't apply just to racing. it's so important that the coxswain, has levity, because, man, can you imagine anything worse than being on Lake Briones doing legs only for 10,000 meters? I mean, it's awful. No one likes that. No one wants to do that. Not ever. They don't ever want to do that. Not ever. And but someone like Marcus can crack some jokes and break the tension, and make it fun. And all of a sudden, that fatigue that disappears. And I think in moments like that, a coxswain can be some sort of Svengali, and it really accentuates and deepens your love for the sport and your love for the experience, and it helps inform you about why you're out there, why you're out there doing what you're doing, and just can make it can turn something that could be a miserable experience into a fun memory. And that's the thing that I've taken away from those four guys that I love, and they're all successful as they've moved on through life, and they're making things less miserable by telling a story and making something that's a little bit dreary, making it fun.
Yeah, I'd actually like to run with that a little bit. This is also something that comes up a lot, and I've dealt with this myself personally, where there are crews that go out there and they're very serious. They're like, we're nothing but business. We're getting things done. We have races to win and stuff. And I gotta be honest, the attitude alone kind of makes us not win. Like it's really, like, they may be amazing rowers. They're good people, but there is something about keeping it light and keeping it fun that I think has such a massive impact on your mentality going up to the line. Like, I have to say, I won't name any names, but within the last couple of years, I have coxed a couple crews where we were sitting on the line and I knew we were going to lose, and it was awful. And it was attitude alone. And I, being one coming from California universities where we race side by side and we're maybe a little bit laid back, but we just have a different approach and different way of kind of keeping things light and fun, and kind of just like, yes, we're pushing, but there's just a different chemistry that goes on that I think has such an impact. And I think that's what you guys seemed to have in 2004, when you won the gold in Athens, that there was just a different chemistry that you just don't find everywhere. And I know you can speak to that for ages, but what do you think about attitudes? I mean, even at the highest level, a lot of people think that it needs to be more serious, and how do you balance keeping it light with keeping the intensity, if that makes sense, mentality wise? Like, how could a coxswain help a crew keep it light, but keep it business?
Yeah, that's a great that's the $1 million question is how do you keep that balance of fun, but keep the structure, right? And I think that part of it has to be a two-way relationship between the coxswain and his crew. And, it can't be manifested purely from the coxswain. The fun and the levity and the structure of the workout absolutely can come from the coxswain, but the athletes have to respond to that, right? And Pete, when we were dealing with him, I'll just tell a quick little story. We were out there warming up in Athens, and we were just sort of messing around, joking, waiting for a clear place. And then Pete, the German women's 8, came up next to us and stopped, and then they got ready for a start. And so Pete,
this is nothing but bad news.
Right? Yeah.
Already.
International incident, and Pete's like, "All right, sit ready for a start." And so we did our start, and the German women's 8 beat us. And Pete's like, "All right, guys, let's get this, let's get this thing dialed in." But we could just sort of switch instantly, and it was like he could just reach over, and we could do it ourselves, or he could do it. He could just reach over and flipping a light switch on and off. It kind of gives me goosebumps just thinking about it. But we could just go from that happy-go-lucky into race mode. And, I always tell us when we were at the starting line, Ed from row 2K was there. And we were just kind of talking to each other at the starting line. We're like, man, I bet Ed is so nervous for us right now. Or as we were sitting there just chatting, and we're like, man, I bet Ed is so nervous. Like, yeah, he is probably sweating bullets. So we were just, sitting there talking about Ed from row 2K, Ed, just being so nervous for us. And we could just look over and see how, it looks like he was wearing this level of stress on our behalf. And then, as we started to get ready for the race, get ready for the start, that veil sort of comes down, and we're in mode to really execute. And so part of that was, Pete could do it for us, tell us, or we could do it ourselves, but we could just turn that intensity on and off. And that relationship that we had with him, it has to be two-way, but, a coxswain can only provide that. And, I think it's difficult to force it upon the crew unless they respond, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think having that two-way street it's impossible without it. Like you have to have that trust. You have to have everyone sort of buying into the same idea and the same mentality. Yeah. I mean, we've all had boats like that. I have some that are just like, they're not having it with the jokes, like they don't think they're funny, and I'm like, all right, we could lighten up a little bit. Like we might have a better row out here. Everyone's like so stuck up today and just so stuffy that, if we just lightened up a little bit, like things would be better. And then you have those guys that you can't shut up, and then, but there's kind of a place for that sometimes. Like, you have not attitude necessarily, but if you have that guy that kind of doesn't shut up, but everyone wants him in the boat because he just keeps it, like no matter what's going on, things are going to be okay. And so, I think you're right about just kind of buying into the idea. Now, do you think that also has to be chemistry with the crew? Like, do you have to have the right guys to do that? Or is there something specifically that a Cox might be able to do to sort of initiate that? Maybe this is kind of the same question, but kind of just keep it light. Like, is it the jokes? Is it like adding in an unexpected drill? Like, how can we kind of get you dialed back in, but keep it light? Like, is it cracking a joke in the middle of a serious drill, when everyone's just like the tension's too high? And I don't know. I don't know. Well, that's a tricky one. I asked that terribly, but I get that a lot,
I know what you're going for. During drills and in an intense session, there wouldn't be, very, very many jokes. If Mike's around, like we're dialed in.
Oh yeah.
And there was no messing around. I used to tell people that, when we were rotating through by sixes, you've got about 30 seconds to move your slide or do whatever it is you're going to do. You've got about 30 seconds to do it, because when the next pair rotates through, I mean, it was dialed in, and Pete expected us to have everything ready and together. So I don't want to or give the impression that there was an inch of give or play with Pete, but there was also a dynamic of he knew when we were so focused and we didn't want to mess up, and he was going to let you off the hook because he knew how tired you were and how hard you were trying, right? So, and that's a different kind of thing, because we were so focused all the time and so focused that he knew that he needed to break that tension a little bit. So if there's no tension there to be broken, then it just kind of makes things a little more goofy, I think, if a coxswain is cracking jokes.
Yeah.
But if your guys are serious, then the coxswain will know how to read that. And I think that, you're a great example of just how, like, for example, when we went to we raced in San Diego, you're just kind of herding all of the kittens together. And then, when the race starts, the joking around is over, and you were very aggressive, driving us down the course. and that's what it has to be. That's the best you can do, right? And, that's the best you can do. And man, I think it's tough for coxswains when they're in that high school realm, that high school age, either in this summer club racing or in their own high school. It's tough for them because you're always going to have a couple of kids that are just a little bit, they're a little bit unfocused, and they're not going to shine to their full extent. And I think that if I was going to pass on any words of wisdom, it would be, hey, hang in there, do the best you can with some of the challenging athletes that you're dealing with. Get yourself to college where you're going to be at the next level, right? That's going to be the next step, and they're really going to be able to shine. They're going to get themselves in a position to work with serious athletes in college. And I think maybe that's the best piece of advice that we can hope to pass on to a high school kid that's a little bit frustrated, is that they're going to be able to shine down the road.
Yeah, that's true. And you actually kind of touched on dealing with the difficult athletes too. And I think we've all kind of had that person that kind of makes life a little bit difficult. And it may not be at the Olympic level, but even at university and at clubs. And I mean, I know I certainly have had athletes that really challenge me, like not in a good way, but in like a kind of a tantrum way in a way. And it's very hard to deal with, but like if a coach keeps them in a boat and you need to make things work, it's equally frustrating for the other guys in the boat. But I mean, we've had some attitudes, like real problems. And what would you say or recommend for a coxswain to maybe try to deal, like how would you deal with an athlete that just really throws attitude all the time? I mean, you do hear it even in some of the Olympic boats. I hear things about some of these guys and they're just like, it's not out of control, but it's a challenge. It's a real challenge. And when you are supposed to be a leader, you don't want to be a dictator. But if some of these guys just don't play ball with you and it's one guy in the crew, but he's in the crew, what is there anything a coxswain can do there to kind of mitigate that? I get a lot of questions about that, about like, there's this one guy or there's this one girl in the boat that just really makes my life difficult. How can I manage that?
Well, there's one story that sort of comes to my mind, and it's more of a life story, I think. And it's about my relationship with Pete. And I think I have to share it because it's such a blessing. Within all the things that are happening in a crew, there has to be discipline, right? I mean, in some sense, and interpersonal discipline, a love between brothers and sisters. And if you don't have that, then you're wasting your time in some sense. You're never going to reach that guy. But even off the water after our careers were over, there were moments of, sort of, I don't know how to say it other than maybe discipline with Pete, because he stopped me one time and he's like, hey, listen, man, we're not rowing anymore and you're partying and it's going too far and you need to reel it in and it's not funny anymore. And, and I did, by the way. But I think there are moments of discipline that we have for each other, and that hopefully that's a two-way street with the coxswain, making them better too. But on and off the water, how we interact for each other and how we care about each other. And, someone like Pete saying, hey, listen, no good. This is not what we're doing. This is not what we're about. You need to get your act together. Sometimes that's more about life than it is about coxing, but definitely, it needs to occur. And the coxswain shouldn't be afraid to whether it's on the water or off the water, help their teammate understand, like, hey, this is something that's going on that affects all of us. It affects you negatively. It affects us negatively. Get it together. Let's get this sorted out. And I think if the athlete doesn't respond to that, if your teammate doesn't respond to that, then, you've done the best you can. and it's time to move on. But it's definitely on them to fix the issue once the coxswain has identified it, and they're doing it out of love and out of camaraderie and out of being a great teammate and a great friend. When it comes from that place, then the athlete needs to listen and respond.
Yeah, I think that's really good. I really get a lot of questions about that. And obviously, having dealt with that myself, sometimes you're just at a loss. I've been doing this a long time. And even still, I'm like, I'm just nothing is getting through to this guy. Nothing. And it's like, I just don't even know. But you have to work with them. So,
that reminds me of a great quote I heard from Hartmut Buschbacher. Someone he was talking about having the athletes go out in singles or pairs, and someone asked him, well, what do you do about the athletes that can't keep up with the main group? And he said, get new athletes. So
I like it.
So sometimes there's
Tough
that
crowd, yeah.
there's you may need to get yourself some new athletes, but you're lucky because you can choose from this wide array of international elites that will race for you. So,
well, for my club,
yeah.
I try, and I am all about attitudes. I want nothing but fun. I mean, there's 3 rules to the boat club, and one of them is you have to be fun. Like if there's attitudes, I don't care how fast you are. You can pull a 5:30, and I don't want you. I'm sorry. I mean, I might. You'd have my attention. But if you have a bad attitude, I don't want anything to do with it. Because it's rowing can't be fun. Like rowing needs, it hurts. Make it fun, right?
Yes. And you just made me think about one of the things that I thought was so special, not just about our 8, but the entire group that I trained with in 2004 and 2008, is that they were very good men. And when we encountered an ego, I mean, you could almost set your watch by how long that person would last. So like, oh boy, that guy's got a real ego problem. You could just set your watch, and you can just kind of wonder, like, is the whole group going to take this guy down, or is it going to just be Mike, or maybe Mike and a little bit of Pete, or okay, I'll give this guy about a week. And, sure enough, if the coaches or Pete didn't get to this guy, then the entire group would crush them, right? So, we had one of our guys that was constantly bragging about how great his erg score was. It didn't turn out well. So I think that sometimes those problems, if the atmosphere is correct, and it was for our training group, there's those people were aggressively dealt with.
I love that so much. And so, okay, here's another thing though, too. You said that some of that came from Pete. And I also get a lot of questions, and obviously just having done this myself, sometimes it's a little bit hard to do that. I don't want to say it's hard just keeping your athletes in line and stuff, but sometimes, especially for newer coxswains or, with newer guys or guys you don't know very well, it can be kind of difficult to kind of take the business route and go up to them and be like, this is not, you can't do this. Like, this isn't okay. So do you think a lot of that came from Pete? Was that mostly Mike? Was that did Pete just sort of have that ingrained in him that he was just like, this was his turf? Like, I'm sorry, I don't want the attitudes here. Or do you think it was like he needed a little bit of help also from the crew, from Mike, from other resources?
Oh, we would definitely have his back in a situation where he needed to reel someone in a little bit,
Okay.
Absolutely. We would have his back, and Mike would have his back. And, man, when I think about how a coxswain interacts, it has to be them, the way that who they are as a person. Like, I'll give you an example. Ned Del Gurcio, Ned is now coaching at Yale. I mean, I think Ned would be the first to tell you could literally anyone could go and move through the motions of, pasting the workout on the wall, because he's got a great head coach up there. Anyone could do that, but you want Ned because of the type of man that he is. And you're paying him you're having him at Yale because of the type of man that he is and how he interacts with these athletes, right? And so, yeah, a part of that was always who Pete was as a person, right? Just having that easy, authoritative, but a very cool guy who knows when to let you off the hook and knows when to keep you on the hook, right? And so I think that has to be who they are as people. And I've seen a lot of coxswains grow, in their own understanding and the way that they deal with people. Marcus McElhenney, he really grew as a person and just really developed uh, a very sharp approach to his workouts and boat management as he stayed with us for a few years. And that happens to the coxswain too. But yeah, it really is who they are as people that makes them so special and gives them that easy authority that they can, use to manipulate the athletes.
Totally. Yeah, it makes absolute sense. And just a couple more things here. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but related to that, what else do you think coxswains can do besides sort of have that aura of leadership about them? What are some specific things that you think, whether it's on land or in the water, that coxswains can do that really help earn your trust? At the highest level, what is going to make you choose another cox over another?
Well, I think since we're trying to help out young coxswains, what I have my athletes, what I talk to them about is they should have a logbook, right? And that applies to coxswains too, so that they're tracking what's going on, results, weather, rig, so that each day isn't lost, right? There's some sort of recording about what happened, what was good, what was bad. This rig had this effect, this boat, this set of oars. All these things can be, gathered together, but sometimes we lose them just through human memory, and right. So I think for a young coxswain, that's got to be about keeping accurate records, right? Keeping track of your athletes, herding the kittens, right? Getting them all to the race, which is something that you were so good at. Just sort of getting everyone there, and getting them excited, keeping them enthusiastic, right? That's so important. So I think for that high school coxswain, keeping those accurate records, and you know what, Whitney, that's going to be something that 10 years from now they're going to have that little notebook and spin back through it.
I still have mine.
There you go.
I love it. I look back at stuff and I'm like, God, I was so cute back in the day.
Well, it's a nice memory.
It is, right? Actually. And sometimes you remember things, you're like, oh, damn, that was a good call. I should put that back into my repertoire. But it is really fun. It is really fun. So you kind of remind yourself too of I think how far you've come. And, it is little things, like knowing the guy's rigging. I think learning, I think being a student of the sport is really important as a younger cox. And you can never know too much about rowing. Maybe someone like, Chris Korzanowski or whatever, who knows so much about rowing, knows a lot about rowing, but you can always learn more and learn from other coaches and other athletes. And again, keep track of it. Like you said, I remind myself, like I said, of things that I learned 10 years ago. And I was kind of forgot that. It's been a while because I haven't done that, or I haven't used that call or approached it in that way. So I think that's really, really good advice.
Pete would know, because Volpe was our stroke seed, and Pete would know kind of where Volpe's feet needed to be. And if Volpe was what about that, he could just tell him, and I would set my feet off of him, and Pete would know all these things. And we would come down and the boat's already set up. And then we had Matt Imes setting things up. So, it all worked together, but definitely Pete knew where our feet was, where they were supposed to be, what our heights were, all those things. And that comes back to, just the fundamentals of writing things down and recording them. And then it's already there. So you're not wasting one single day. When we showed up at a new race course with the boat, we're not wasting a single day. Not an hour is wasted. because he already knew. And when we showed up, we're ready to go. So those habits that are ingrained when we're in high school, they can just be a blessing to you, and they affect the rest of your life, because I don't think your life would be the same. The organizational skills that you have developed are a real benefit to you as you've moved on in your professional life, because you're juggling all these different things. And I think that, I don't know for a fact, but I would imagine that being a coxswain has really helped you, going to LMU and being able to juggle that heavy academic workload while also herding all these kittens on the rowing team. That's impressive. And it's a great thing for a young man or woman to aspire to.
It really is. I mean, we become expert water bottle holders and keeping track of oars and socks and time. But no, I think you're absolutely right. It really is invaluable, and definitely something to learn. I think the takeaway from that too is not wasting time. So if a coxswain in any way can help reduce time, whether that's turning a boat around, having a boat ready to go, getting there a few minutes early, having a cox box ready, like being ready to go in the water, not like getting dressed when everybody's, taking the boat down on the dock. Those little things here and there, I think, are what sort of start to add up and make a cox a little bit more edgy, a little bit more on top of it than someone else. So again, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's kind of what it
absolutely
what it seems to be. Someone's got to keep you in line. I don't know.
That's right.
Okay, so what do you think about calls? So again, I get so many questions about this, and people really want to know what some of your favorite calls have been and what some of your least favorite. Like, what do you hear and you're like, oh God, oh no, we're not almost there. Like, what are some of those calls that, like, give me your, like, the best and the worst, just a couple.
Well, I think my favorite of all time, and Pete had never done this before, but we had about somewhere around 300 meters to go in Athens, and he just stopped, and he said, "Guys, we are 1 minute away from a gold medal." And then he went back. Into his calls, and I think you can actually find some of his race calls, and that would be a neat research project if a coxswain wanted to go online and try to find some of his. I think they have some audio files online somewhere. I should find those just to listen to his voice again. But each coxswain that I loved had their own different sort of style, like chopping wood or just some of their little phrases that I really loved. And I don't want to go to the negatives, but I have to. I mean, maybe counting.
Maybe counting. Yeah, names. It doesn't have to be like a specific person. Just something that you're like, oh no, this is not gonna. No, yeah. So it doesn't have to be specific people, but just like some calls that you're like, just don't ever. No.
Yeah, I think like maybe screaming the numbers of a 10. That wasn't my favorite. That wasn't my favorite, but yeah.
Yeah, I think the counting gets old. So
yeah, I like to think about I really like. I love the phraseology of just telling the story of the race while it's happening. I think that's the one I'm going to leave with that today and enjoy that thought.
Oh, I'm so glad. Thank you. Yeah. Well, I mean, this has been really valuable. So I mean, I could talk to you about rowing all day and just listen to you. I don't even need to ask questions. You could just talk about rowing, and I'm just inspired incessantly. So if you can leave us with just a little bit about 2004. We obviously haven't had an 8 accomplish what you guys have since then quite yet. We've come close, but we don't have another gold medal in the 8. And I think people around the world are greatly inspired by your race. And I know I am, even just watching it, even now I could watch it and I can just feel the chemistry and the work and the amount that you guys had to put into that race is unmatched. I mean, it's absolutely incredible. And so what do you think were some things that you sort of, I don't even know how to ask, but like, I mean, just what about that race was so special? Like what, was it the one goal? Was it something Pete said, like 300 meters to go? Was it like, how did that race feel? I mean, to be the bad rookie reporter, like I mean, it's hard to even put that race into words. It's a beautiful, beautiful race.
Well, I remember as we were getting ready for that race, Mike sort of totally reversed the strategy a little bit, because in the heat, we're going to run along with the Canadians and then try to take them down at the end, um, and then for the final, he had us take a move. And if people watch that race, you'll see, we're with the other teams, and then kaboom, we're open water up. And, he wanted to close the door and end the race in the first 700 meters. And the fact that crew had the ability to do that, and we trusted in him, trusted in his plan, executed it flawlessly. I mean, I think it just really speaks to the relationship that we had with him and with each other. And that crew was really special because I've been in fast crews that could run along that fast in good conditions. And the next year we had another very fast crew that we went almost the same speed or faster in a time trial. But it wasn't quite as flawless in every condition. But that crew, it could do it in any conditions, headwind, tailwind, chop, flat water. It didn't matter. That crew could be dialed in any situation. And it was a really very skillful boat. I mean, I could bore you with lots of examples of impossible drills that we would do for balance. And so I think that's really innate to that crew and their commitment to each other. And just the amount of positive interaction that we had with each other, constantly communicating. JR in the bow seat communicating up to Pete, and Pete not being threatened by that, that back and forth communication that they had. And I mean, a lot of coxswains would be threatened by that, but Pete wasn't. If there was something happening and JR wanted to communicate it, he would, and little things like that, just constantly polishing around the edges, just made that crew so special in terms of their boat feel and our willingness to execute Mike's plan exactly the way he wanted it. And, it really was. I remember leading into that move and Pete telling us to hold. And as he was telling us to hold, everyone was so excited that we were actually taking ground on the other crews before he called the move. And that just speaks to the level of commitment we had to Mike's plan, and Ted Nash was there, always being great and wonderful and legendary. And Matt Imes was there. It really speaks, I think, to the level of commitment we had to each other. And that it was a very special moment. And thank you for letting me share a little bit about that.
Oh, I could listen to that all day. I mean, it gives me chills. It's absolutely amazing. Thank you. I think a really good takeaway from that as well is having that communication with your crew. Again, like you said, Pete and JR, from, bow to stern can have that kind of communication and trust without the threat. And I think it is easy to kind of feel threatened, when someone's like shouting at you or yelling at you or making other suggestions that kind of make you second guess or go like, oh, wait, should I, like, he's asking for something different than what the coach was. And so should I not? And I think that just speaks to how ironclad your relationship was as a crew. And I think that's really special.
Well, I think we'll have, we've got some good guys. We've got some good, tough guys, and they're killers. They're killers. They're complete killers, and they're ready to go. we have to have another Pete Chipolone, another Pete Chipolone, another Ned, another Marcus, and they've got to be dialed in and ready to go. But it's hard. Pete Chipolones don't grow on trees, and it definitely, it definitely took him, or someone as good as him, and they're not easy to find. So it's tough.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. And it's tough to even get seen and get your foot in the door, even if you are good. Even if you are, getting in front of the right people at the right time, in the right mood and the right location.
And you have a life, and
yeah, exactly.
And there's life keeps moving on, and I really hope for the best for the team, especially right now. We've got the whole virus problem, and the Olympics might be postponed, so that's tough. And the high school that I'm working with, our athletes are off the water, but hopefully, maybe they can listen to this podcast and email you, because you're such a wonderful person, and you'll be happy to help them out, I'm sure.
I would love to.
Very cool.
I would love to. Yeah, absolutely. And so where can we find you if you want us to, follow you on Instagram, anything that you're on that we can follow along your coaching? Well, I guess the coaching is sort of, on the on hold for right now, but in general.
I volunteer with Upper Marion High School a couple days a week. Because the sports insurance business is really busy, but I get there a couple of days a week. I can be found on Facebook. American300.org is a group that a troop resiliency program that I volunteer with with an amazing guy named Robbie Powers. So I'm on Instagram, so I can be found on Instagram, but. Yeah, if anyone has any questions, they want to ask an old rower, danbeery@yahoo.com. That's my email address. If anyone has any questions there, they should feel free to ask. But they should really be asking you if they're a coxswain, because I know you've got a lot of good advice for them. So.
Oh my gosh! Well, thank you. I mean, we've learned. I learned from rowers just as much, and just as much. Making mistakes and doing things wrong to hopefully not do them wrong again. And then just talking to a lot of rowers, it's really just being a student of the sport. Like we talked about, You make the mistakes. Nobody coaches coxswains, you have to, well, very few people do. I guess some people do, but it's hard. Most coaches don't coach coxswains. You have to figure it out. So you have to, screw up a lot and talk to guys like you that have been there and be like, help. Like, tell me something that I can do, so people like me. So it takes time, it takes time.
As a coach, being on the other side in the launch, I have to admit to being completely dependent upon my coxswain to run the workouts. I'm not very useful to them, I think, and I need to be more useful to them. So that's a very good point.
Well, it's tough. I mean, you don't always think about it because you're also, you're still a rower. Like if you got in a boat, you would still probably do what a coxswain told you to do. So that's also just kind of ingrained in you. Like you are simultaneously an amazing leader, but the ultimate team player. So you also as a coach have to sort of balance that. Oh wait, I'm coaching my leader. I'm teaching my leader. So it's a very strange dynamic. It really is.
It is.
It really is. So, okay. Before we sign off here, if you can just give us one takeaway that you think a Cox could work on or implement in their next workout practice, whenever that may be, to sort of gain an edge.
Wow. Well, I think it has to come back to, keeping records, right? And then making sure that if something happens on or off the water, that they're reaching out to that person, patting them on the back, managing them, just like Pete Chipolone would do, right? Out of love, out of being a good teammate, out of being a good friend, out of being a leader, And when that comes from their heart, then at that point it's on the athlete to make the changes. And I think that by doing that, I think maybe Pete would even say that as he would practice doing that as a person walking the earth, I'm sure it made him stronger, right? And I'm sure it affected him too and his ability to lead by consistently doing that. And I think over the years, he learned to become more and more and more of an effective leader. So maybe that's what we could encourage them to do is to, reach out and be firm and be that leader that sort of guides and instructs, and that it's generated from the right place in their heart.
So being proactive.
Yep.
Perfect. I love it. Well, thank you again so much for your time. I really, like I said, could literally listen to you just talk about rowing all day. So so thank you again for your wisdom, and it's a privilege to be able to have you on. So thank you
so much.
Of course, it's my pleasure. So anyone else too that has questions, be sure to follow along at the Candid Cox on Instagram or Iron Will Wit, or feel free to email thecandidcox@gmail.com. We always want to take questions, and I have so many cool guests coming up, and always feel free to reach out. We're a community of people, rowers, coxswains. We all want to help. We all want to be better. We all want to race faster. We all want to win. We all want blah, 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 blah. So again, thank you so much again for your time, and we will see you guys next week. So thanks again. Bye.